Glad to be here. And as was mentioned, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about SANDAG and what's going on there. I'm sure most of you are aware of SANDAG, but for what it's worth, I'm going to go a little bit into the background of what SANDAG is. So SANDAG stands for the San Diego Association of Governments, and it's basically the metropolitan planning organization for the region. So what that means is that it's comprised of our 18 cities within the San Diego region and then the county. And the bottom line is that this government body decides where billions of dollars are spent for regional roads and transit improvement projects within the county. So the Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, is the adopted plan that SANDAG will spend all of its money on in the next 35 plus years. And that plan shows both the projects and what they cost and the estimates, and how they're going to be actually generating the money to pay for their planned improvements. So SANDAG, we leverage our local resources and we receive federal, state, and local funding. That local funding is through our tax dollars. The RTP, which I just mentioned, that's the SANDAG, that's the main plan that the SANDAG puts out, and they put it out every 5 years to meet the federal and state requirements of the region. So the existing approved RTP was approved back in 2015, and we got a 1-year extension through, at the time, Assembly Member Gloria, who's now obviously the mayor of San Diego. And what that RTP was a collaborative effort between the 19 jurisdictions and multiple stakeholder groups, such as other public agencies like Caltrans, the Federal Highway Administration, the wildlife agencies, and then also, the local habitat and environmental coalitions, business industry, and other local electeds. So this RTP included a local funding stream that the voters approved, which is called Transnet. And I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes here. Historically, what SANDAG does is every 5 years, they tweak their existing approved RTP. And they do that to meet whatever new requirements are coming out at the state or federal level. So a couple of those requirements that are in play this time around that are more stringent than previous RTPs is the greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements for climate change. And then also something called vehicle miles traveled, which basically changes the script on how the California Environmental Quality Act regulates traffic and congestion on the roadways. No longer do they look at congestion as a level of service issue, but what they say is basically look at the entire region, identify a baseline, and then reduce that baseline over the next few years by 15% of the miles that everybody travels within the county. So you can think of this as somebody going to work and back, and let's say it's 30 miles. Well, you got to reduce that by 15% in the future with new development and new public infrastructure projects. So unfortunately, the tweaking of the RTP is just no longer the case. SANDAG has a new administration, and the electeds that are in there are a little bit different thinking than previous electeds that were on the board. So SANDAG has completely scrapped the previous RTP and the promised road improvements that were part of that RTP. So things like the SR 78 improvements with the HOV lanes in both directions, and they're starting anew. And this is extremely concerning due to a bill that was passed by Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher back in 2017. And that bill was called AB 805. So historically, the 19 jurisdictions of SANDAG had an equal say on the board. Basically, everything had to be voted on and approved by 2 different measures. First of which was just a simple tally vote, which is just simple majority of those 19 jurisdictions. And then it also had to be passed by a weighted vote, and that's based upon the population. So for example, areas like City of San Diego or City of Chula Vista had more of a weighted vote than, say, the City of Imperial Beach. But what they did is you had to pass both of those measures to actually approve an item. Well, that was changed to basically require all items, for the most part, to require a simple tally vote. But then any 2 jurisdictions could request going to a weighted vote. And if you go to a weighted vote, the tally vote no longer matters. The weighted vote supersedes it. And what happens is the high populous areas, so again, the area at South County, so City of San Diego, City of Chula Vista, they can basically, at the end of the day, call for a weighted vote and vote on items and pass them through without consensus of the other jurisdictions. And obviously this is concerning because it changes that collective approach that once was SANDAG. And instead, it disenfranchises some of those smaller jurisdictions especially in North County for that matter. So as a result, this new RTP, as you can imagine, it's called the 5 Big Bold Moves, allocates the majority of its proposed resources to the dense urbanized areas of the region, which are the areas that control that weighted vote that I just mentioned. So overall, the Supervisor Desmond, he believes that this plan will take away a few things. It's going to take away freedom and flexibility because it, for the most part, tries to force us out of our cars, which I'll go over in more detail. It takes away progress because it doesn't invest in future autonomous vehicles. Instead, it invests in already outdated technology being fixed rail. And then it takes away prosperity because at the end of the day, we're going to be taxed more, both at the local and state level. So as I mentioned, in 1988, San Diego approved Transnet. And what Transnet is it's a half-cent sales tax that was approved to help fund highway and public transit projects in the region. In 2004, that Transnet half-cent sales tax was extended, and we are continuously paying for that until 2048. So we're about halfway through right now, and we'll continue to pay it till 2048. And that passed in 2004 specifically because road projects that were not completed yet were promised to be completed. There was a few in particular that a lot of voters are still frustrated with because they're still bottlenecks, and you can feel it today. And that's the SR 78, the SR 67, the SR 52, and then the 94 125 area there around La Mesa. If you have ever driven on any of those in peak hours, you know how bottlenecked it gets. So from 2005 to present, SANDAG's used that Transnet money and front-loaded 2/3 of the public transit projects, I should say, and they haven't delivered on the promises to upgrade our highways that were in that ballot measure. And we're still going to be paying for that tax for another 27 years. So in fact, a total of 15 projects promised by Transnet have not been completed to date. And now with this new plan, they will never be completed. Of those 15 projects, 14 were the highway projects that I just mentioned. There's only one public transit project that wasn't completed. So in 2019, we learned from SANDAG that the Transnet program was over $20 billion short. And as a result, those remaining 15 projects that I mentioned were indefinitely put on hold. And the new proposed RTP, which will cost $163 billion in today's dollars, will not have those 14 road projects promised completed. So the bulk of this new plan proposes over 2/3 of the capital dollars to be spent on rail, bus, bike lanes, and trails. And honestly, it's not a matter of those things being bad. Overall, public transit's good, bike lanes are good, and we want people to use that. At the end of the day, though, that works in dense urbanized areas, like the city of San Diego and the city of Chula Vista. As soon as you start going into the North County region, we're unfortunately just too sprawled out to really see the benefits of some of those public transit projects. And yet here we are, we're going to be paying for that. So in fact, in this new RTP, they're actually going to be reducing existing that you drive on today, highway lanes. And they're going to do this by taking general purpose lanes. And I'll give you an example. On SR 78, right now there's 3 general purpose lanes in each direction going west to east. They're going to be pulling one of those general purpose lanes off in each direction and making it an express or a managed lane. And then they're going to be adding another managed lane. So pretty soon, if you don't want to pay to use a different type of lane, you're going to be stuck in 2 lanes, whereas right now you can drive in 3 lanes. And the big sticking point that the supervisor always mentions is, less than 3% of the San Diego population currently uses public transit, and this is coming from SANDAG, which is actually less now due to COVID. And SANDAG's plan is only to get 10% of the population to use public transit, meaning 90% of the population will subsidize that 10% of the population on a $163 billion plan. So then it comes to, how is this thing going to get funded? Mind you, you're currently paying a few different types of taxes that supposedly are supposed to be going to improving your roads. So you've got the SB1, which is the gas tax, which you're currently paying 51 cents per every gallon of gas. This is supposed to be going directly into road improvements. Currently, a lot of that's going to public transit, unfortunately. Then you've got the Transnet sales tax, which is that half-cent sales tax that you'll be paying another 27 years on those road projects that will never be delivered. And then on top of all that, you're paying an annual vehicle registration transportation fee. And this is part of your vehicle license. Every year you pay that vehicle license, and part of that is supposed to go to public improvement of highways. But that's not going to be enough money for SANDAG to complete what they need to do. As I mentioned, they're forecasting they're about 20 billion short just for those road projects that I mentioned. So they're going to be starting to tax you new fees to complete their $163 billion plan. How they're going to do this is another local sales tax. So on top of Transnet, which is that half cent, they're looking at another sales tax. That could be anywhere between a full cent, half cent. We don't know quite yet. Typically, these sales taxes, when they are put onto the ballot, they require a supermajority 2/3 vote. We've heard rumblings that what SANDAG's going to do to circumvent, I should say, that requirement is to actually have a, oh shoot, I'm forgetting the name, initiative put on the ballot from the people so that it only requires a simple majority vote. So no longer requiring that 2/3. Then you've got local, another local tax through MTS that they're going to be proposing that will just be in the MTS sphere of influence. So if you're in areas where MTS is currently operating, you'd be paying another sales tax on top of that. And again, that could be anywhere between a full cent to a half cent. And then you've got a couple new things that are really controversial coming down the pike. The first of which is a state per mile fee. Basically, what this is right now is there was a bill that was passed and it's currently in effect, but it's a pilot program in which drivers are tracked per mile and then they pay per mile that they drive. Pretty soon, the state's going to roll this out statewide, and it won't be a opt-in pilot program anymore. It'll be a requirement. And when that happens, SANDAG forecasts that the state per mile fee will be 2.3 cents per every mile you drive, with a half cent increase on an annual basis. And right now there's no cap. At least we don't know what that cap is. So every year it's going to increase a half cent. On top of that, SANDAG wants to propose a 2 cents per mile fee as well. So every time you drive any local road, you'd be paying another 2 cents per mile. And then on top of that, every time you use the Uber or Lyft, they're proposing a $1.25 ride hailing fee. So let's talk a little bit about this RTP timeline and where SANDAG is in the process. They've released their draft environmental impact report, and comments are due. You know, I'm looking at the date right now. It's October 11th, or it's October 7th. The end date for comments due are October 11th. And we've been working with a lot of our jurisdictions to make sure comments have been submitted to SANDAG, addressing issues and concerns that these jurisdictions have. And what they want to do, they want to approve this thing by December of 2021. And the reason for that is it goes back to what I mentioned. Assembly member Gloria actually signed an extension to the RTP to allow a 6th year rather than that 5-year limit that typically SANDAG has to approve RTP. So they're looking to approve this thing by the end of the year. So then it comes down to, what can you all do? What can the public do? What can the chambers do? And anybody else that has potential concerns. And the biggest thing is providing comment, whether that be by that October 11th, which I know is coming up, deadline, or whether that's going to hearings or sending letters to the clerk of the board and spreading the word to others. I'll tell you what, most of the population of San Diego doesn't know what SANDAG is, and they don't understand how powerful they are and what they control. If they were to realize they would start paying per mile fees, I have a feeling a lot of them would be in opposition that we're just not hearing from right now. You know, I listen to the hearings. I'd say 95% of the people that call in are in support of the plan. And there are a bunch of the people that you would probably think they are. You know, it's the climate action coalitions, it's the public transit unions, it's the people that are going to benefit from this type of plan. And again, public transit's not bad, it just doesn't work in North County. And then lastly, make your opinions known to your representatives. Obviously, Supervisor Desmond is overall opposed to this type of plan, but there's other representatives, obviously, that sit on SANDAG. And even if they don't sit on SANDAG, it's good to have that dialogue with your representatives. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben. If you do have questions, please speak loudly so that the owl will pick it up. Colleen.
How do they track how many miles I ride?
Great questions. So again, this is right now, it's a pilot program going on in more of like the Northern California area. And right now it's an opt-in program, meaning drivers, they choose to do this. And if they choose to do it, what they do is they register and they actually log their hours. In the future, though, SANDAG actually has some discussion about this on how they're going to be tracking, and it's going to be one of a few different types of technology. The first of which would be potentially kind of like what's going on with your fast pass or express pass on when you use the express lanes, a transponder where it just tracks every time you drive on these roads per mile. It can ping that to some bureaucracy where they can review it and then charge you a annual or monthly fee. There's also the thought that this might be a cell phone technology. You download an app, you have to have that app on when you drive your car, and it charges you. Another one, a lot of these newer cars coming out, they have odometers that have the capability to send this type of information to, again, some other type of bureaucracy to track this. So technology-wise, it's not absolutely clear. It's very relevant that we have that type of technology, that capability, but we don't know what type they're going to be using at this point. But they will be using something in the future to do that.
If I drive from Southern California back to Oklahoma or Kansas to visit relatives and drive back, do I cross the state line? Do I turn it off?
Great question. Something we'll have to direct to our state representatives in SANDAG. I truthfully don't know how they're planning on doing this. And that's one of the concerns. You kind of hit the nail right on the head there. You know, what about all the drivers that come into our region, but use their money elsewhere and live elsewhere? You know, so basically, if you're visiting San Diego, you have to know that you have to turn on some weird transponder or app every time you hit the roads. I don't see that taking place. So truthfully, I don't know how it's all going to work out. And it seems like it's going to be a complicated program they put into place.
So Ben, are you saying this hasn't been really well thought out?
I mean, yes, that's kind of what I'm saying is, you know, the whole plan overall, if you look at the EIR and if you look at the proposed RTP, it's a bunch of lines on a map. It's a bunch of colors and lines on a map. And that's what they're planning this $163 billion program after. It just doesn't seem like there's much analysis. It doesn't seem realistic. And yet it's touted as the most cutting edge, innovative plan that the region's ever seen.
Yeah, I don't know if you would be aware of this, but I think I heard that in the federal infrastructure bill, there was also going to be a per mile tax for vehicles. So is this potentially a three-way tax on each mile we drive?
Yeah, good point. I heard something about that as well. And to answer your question, I mean, at the end of the day, it could be that, right? So if you hit federal highway roads, you'd be taxed something. If you hit state roads, you'd be taxed something. And then you hit local roads, you'd be taxed something. Now, maybe in the future, what they do is they bundle that all together. I don't know. But yeah, it could be 3 different types of fees. And, you know, they're not cheap. We're talking 2-3 cents per mile. That adds up pretty quick. Another point to be made, a lot of, there's an argument to say, look, the reason why we're doing this per mile is because people are going to electric vehicles. And right now you're paying an SB1 gas tax and if you really break that down, it's basically a per mile tax as well, because every gallon of gas costs X amount and your car gets X amounts of miles per gallon. But the issue with that, if the taxes were going to go back to the roads, and like SB1's supposed to be doing right now, and that was it, maybe we wouldn't be so opposed to this. But there's no promise in the future that the SB1 gas tax is going away. In fact, if you know the state of California at all, I don't know the last time the state said, you know what, we don't need this tax anymore. We'll just get rid of it. You guys don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's what they keep on saying is, well, as people go to electric, gas tax isn't effective. Well, then get rid of the gas tax. And you actually prove to the people that this will just be one tax and not another tax on top of one we're already getting. And that's the big concern there.
Hey, Scott, this is Aaron.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Hey, just want to point out that according to the Department of Motor Vehicles, just 1.2% of all registered passenger vehicles in the state of California are electric. So that's a pretty important data point there. I'd also like to ask, Ben, and I've asked this to you in another chamber meeting before, but what percentage of SANDAG estimates have been correct in the past?
I wish I could answer that. I know that
Zero.
SANDAG has had.
I believe
a
it's zero.
history- Yeah.
Have been correct.
Well, you're being a little less diplomatic than me, but yeah, you know, they have a history. They truthfully have a history of not being correct on their analyses and their statistics. I would assume this is very similar to the past.
Yeah, the other thing I would point out is if we remember when the leadership change happened at SANDAG, this plan was put forward very shortly after the leadership change. And it seems that everything else since then has been pursued to justify the plan rather than the data justifying the plan. Like they didn't collect the data first and then say, oh, this is the plan. The 5 big moves was put forward very early on. And as one of my graduate school professors used to say, if you torture the data long enough, it'll confess to anything. So I'd be, you know, I mean, Tri-City doesn't take a position on these things unless our board takes a position on stuff. But having lived here my entire life, as many of us have, the SANDAG proposals have to be looked at with intense scrutiny. And I know that's why we're doing this here today. And I think many of the changes that have happened over the last few years just require us to be even more careful about how we approach these things.
Anyone else on Zoom have any questions? Anyone else in the room? I have a few questions, but I want to give you guys a chance first. Colleen?
Yeah, has the chamber interfaced with our local SANDAG representative? I'm not sure who it is right now.
Christopher.
Christopher?
Yeah. Not specifically on this topic, but he's on our side. The problem is what Ben had mentioned earlier, that the votes are loaded towards the cities.
Yeah, and maybe I can just mention, you know, we work closely with Christopher on these items, and he is opposed to the plan overall conceptually, just like Supervisor Desmond and a lot of the other North County and East County representatives are. So I know he is very engaged. We do weekly briefings with his office on this. So at the end of the day, though, it only takes a few of those South County elected representatives to kind of shift the tide on whether or not to approve this. So then it really comes down to, you know, the ballot box and making sure we don't approve new taxes to fund this dang thing.
Ben, along those lines, does SANDAG have total autonomy in bringing this to the voters, or is there anything the Board of Supervisors can to do to put the brakes on it?
You know, I don't know if you've kind of been taking a look at the Board of Supervisors dynamics recently, but I'll say that overall they're pretty sympathetic towards SANDAG now, supportive. They like the plan because it benefits their constituents. And Supervisor Desmond, Supervisor Anderson are, I would say, the two supervisors that don't agree with that, but unfortunately they're the minority there. But to answer your question, to put anything onto the ballot, yeah, the county would approve putting it onto the ballot, confirming if it's a initiative, confirming the signatures, and then confirming the ballot language itself.
Okay, so actually, just along the lines of what you just mentioned, actually, one of my friends got an email from Supervisor Lawson Reimers because he had emailed to express concern about this. Her office replied back saying she does not favor vehicle mile tax. I was actually surprised to see that.
Oh, good. Let's hold our feet to the fire and make sure that's actually the case. That's great to hear.
My other question, and I know we've talked about this in our chamber coalition groups, but can you just talk a little bit about the equity issues in terms of like the people that are most impacted by this, or the people that can least afford it, that can't necessarily afford to live where they work?
Yeah, really good point. So as I kind of alluded to, obviously housing in the county is extremely expensive, no matter where you look. We're seeing our workforce get further and further pushed out to Mexico, to the county of Riverside, to the cities of like Temecula, all the way up to Hemet. And they're driving in, and they're the ones going the furthest, right? They're also going to be the ones charged the most by driving if we do a per mile tax. So it is very interesting to me and to the supervisor that we're going to be doing a tax that, you know, the rich can afford, but the ones that are not getting paid much can't.
Have you gotten any support from the, some people use transportation constantly like FedEx or those kinds of folks?
They typically don't weigh in on this type of thing. You know, we've had some local businesses that are larger in scale voice concern. Whether they do that publicly, yet to be determined.
All right. Any other questions either in the room or online? All right, with that, Ben, thank you very much. I know we'll continue to stay in touch on this topic, but thank you for sharing this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.